Hi there, good afternoon and welcome to a webinar from Deakin University on retail management and the retail landscape. My name is Steve Ogden-Barnes. I'm a lecturer in marketing within the MBA programme at the Deakin Graduate School of Business, and I look after particularly the retail elements of the offer with a focus on the retail specialisation and new specialisation within the MBA programme. Before we get started, I'll just give you a couple of heads up. We'll be going for about half an hour, and hopefully you'll have the chance, if you want to pose or to type some questions through on the panel in front of me here. I'll try to respond to those as best I can. What I want to do is really spend half an hour talking about the overall retail landscape, perhaps for those of you who aren't so familiar with the contemporary developments in the field. I'll look at some of the key players and just give you a snapshot of what they're doing, and you'll see how evolving the industry is, and also discuss some of the forces which are at play in the retail industry, both globally and locally, which are changing the way that, or starting to influence the way that retailers are doing business, and in some cases changing the way they're doing business as well. And to wrap up with, I'll just give you a few personal thoughts on the career pathways within retail management and what's now demanded of new entrants to what is a rapidly changing industry. Okay. Just want to have a look at something I touched on earlier, which is the evolution within the industry. It's easy to think of retail, familiar as it is to all of us, as a fairly static force on the landscape, but retail, as other industries do, is always evolving and always changing. We look at how things were done sort of in the early part of the last century, and it all looks sort of quite familiar and homely, but of course, as with automotive, as with technology, as with engineering, there are forces at work which change the pace of development and force a pace of development in what is a highly competitive industry as well. So we move really from the old-fashioned merchant, which was a familiar feature in towns and villages all over the world, into the, again, more traditional view of retail, the corner shop and the service implications which that brings to mind as well, and then the advent of the more automated retail experience with the start of the supermarket mentality, moving into the corporatization of that with the large players dominating their particular sectors. In this case, it's Publix from the US in the 1950s, through to what we now recognise and see all around us, which is retail as a mass industry serving mass needs through the supermarkets we all go through or all go to, often many times a week. So we see the big scale of retail at play, but we also see sort of strong niches emerging as well, and some of those players doing very well, in some cases despite their limited offer and despite their small size. So there's a real spectrum of opportunity and a real spectrum of activity, from the very small, local, independent retailer through to the mass, through to the national, through to the global as well. We see in some ways evolution perhaps trying to capture the good old days, and if you look at many supermarkets now, you'll see a hark back to almost recreating a market atmosphere which used to actually determine the way that these businesses look like as well. And if you play that forward, we look at the cutting edge of evolution, which is in this case a Tesco's initiative from South Korea, whereby shoppers now shop for virtual products using technologies encapsulated in their mobile handsets as well. So here we can see shoppers actually taking photographs of QR codes and barcodes to build a shopping list, which will then be delivered to their home later that day as they return from work. So again, from those simple beginnings of the merchant in the town in a relatively short time span, we see lots of change, lots of evolution at play, and as we'll look at in a few minutes' time, an increasing degree of evolution, that the pace, if nothing else, only seems to accelerate. What about the industry? What about the environment that this evolution is taking place in? There's a great report which is free to anybody who wants it from Deloitte, and it's called Global Powers of Retailing. And in this you'll find a summary really of the key trends and also of the key players who are succeeding on the global retail landscape. Now we are seeing some challenging economic global conditions which affect retail sometimes first and sometimes hardest as people's spending patterns change. But despite the bad news we often hear about retail, there's a lot of positives, there as well, particularly for the players who are on top of their game. So if we look at the industry last year, again, despite some of that doom and gloom, of the top 250 retailers on the global landscape, 80% posted growth and maintained their margins through that growth as well, which is an indication of an intrinsically healthy industry, and that's sometimes not a story that's often put across. Also intrinsic to the industry is internationalization. You'll see many of these players now don't just operate on their domestic shores, they take their business overseas to new markets, which again provides new opportunities for customers, but it also provides new career opportunities for those who enter the industry and who wish to sort of take part in that globalization journey which now increasingly defines retail. We are seeing, and let's just go back to some of those challenges which retailers increasingly have to overcome. We are seeing questionable consumer confidence in some markets. We are seeing increasing costs of raw materials. We are seeing a discount mentality increasingly defining the retail landscape. Price transparency for those of you who now commonly go to the internet to find the cost of something. Again, those are all pressures to a degree on the retail sector, but many of them are also on opportunities. Online shopping, for example, for retailers who've grasped online shopping, that's one of the standout growth areas across the sector as well. Price transparency, again, some retailers have been able to capitalize on shoppers' price transparency activities and position themselves first and foremost in that customer's mindset by clever use of marketing and by social media marketing in particular. So although those forces continue to shape the sector and the industry in general, individual retailers are able to respond to these challenges in often individual and unique ways, and in doing so carve for themselves a viable market share and a viable market sector as well. Let's just have a quick look at some of the major players. Again, the Deloitte report lists 250 leading retailers, but as we move close to the top of that list, we see companies like Walmart, who many of us are familiar with in name and perhaps also in visitation as well. There's always something going on in retail, and for a massive retailer like Walmart, they've been, I think, somewhat disappointed by their performance in recent times as well. And there's also been some questions raised about the ethics of business dealings in some of their new and emergent markets, which is now sort of gaining some attention as well. So challenges to be faced in terms of corporate social responsibility perhaps, and in terms of the old favourite sales growth. However, the business continues to evolve in that space, and now we're seeing a real focus, perhaps back to some of those images I showed earlier, on the fresh category as a standout part of the business, involving things like higher staff training and direct shipping from source to reduce wait times for products. We look at Tesco's, again, a big international player, and here's just some evidence of the value of keeping on top of your game. Tesco's have essentially been bulletproof for many years. However, a few factors have come together in very recent times to impact their performance as well. We're seeing stalled growth, we're seeing perhaps an overinvestment in hypermarkets, and we're seeing the real need, for example, for the business to actually put its prices up to maintain margin, something which has been against the ethos of Tesco's for a long time. But again, we see online being the standout for them as well, at least in grocery terms. And so here we, again have a business which has historically been top of its game, but here we have some evidence of the need to continue to work the retail mix to make sure that those advantages stay with you. Costco, in some ways, a polar opposite. Those of you who've been or familiar with Costco will be familiar with the warehouse format, bulk selling, a membership base, and in the US in particular, and perhaps capitalizing upon consumers' reticence to spend. We're seeing some great numbers from Costco as well, both in terms of physical visitation, in terms of membership, and also in terms of online too. So here's a business that's been able to take those circumstances and work them to their advantage. We've talked about online again, and I'll just sort of recap on some startling figures in relation to online. Although overall retail growth has been noted to slow in some countries, the exception is online retail, and that brings a new mindset to the market and a new channel of engagement as well. And globally, we're looking at online retailing growing 10 to 15% or more per annum, and for the retailers who capitalize on that, that can be a real strength in their portfolio. In the US, for example, we're looking at total online sales hitting 10% of the spend in the very foreseeable future. And here in Australia, where we're seeing online growth of 12% per annum, but with some real peaks as well. 23% was noted in April. So again, this involves a new kind of retail professional, it involves a new kind of retail mindset, and it also opens up new career paths within the industry, which probably didn't exist only a few short years ago. We hear about omnichannel as well, and that is related to online, and all that really means is we're now seeing a new kind of consumer who shops across channels, not just within them, and central to that is things like the use of social media, things like the use of mobile phones and mobile devices to drive that interest. And again, for the businesses who are able to capitalize upon this, it can be a really strong selling point and a really strong advantage. And let's put a name to that omnichannel face. New Look in the UK, a low price value retailer, very strongly omnichannel in their new store formats, and again capitalizing on that other aspect of internationalization with big plans for China in 2014. And we're seeing this whole value mentality working particularly well on the international scene with companies like Zara and like Topshop taking their offer to international shores, including Australia in this case. And the good old mobile phone, that's now our friend in store, and the thing to watch out for here is what's called geofencing, which means that retailers can target customers who sign up in particular locations that might be a store, or it might be a recreational area, for example, like a ski slope or a sporting club, as the North Face in the USA have done, to try to get consumers not just when they're in the shop, but when they're perhaps in an activity or engaged in activity that's related to what it is the retailer sells. So the mobile phones that we have now will almost become the new face of the company, the new salesperson going forward more so than ever. I just want to touch on a very brief little bit of theory, and this is how we actually start to break down this complex evolving landscape. We look at what's called the unique value proposition of a business, and we look at things like how do they market, how do they position, which channels from that omni-channel selection are they using, how do they manage loyalty, how do they manage their customer base, and what products do they put out there to help to create and reinforce their competitive advantage. And then the flip side, of course, is how well do we do things? How well do we spend our marketing dollar? How hard does our inventory work for us? How scientific is our pricing, and how well do we use people within stores? Think of that almost as two sides of the same coin. Now, retail demands those skills in equal measure, the unique value skills in terms of what you offer, and the profit skills in terms of what you do and how well you do it. And really those are the areas now where we're seeing a renewed interest for professionalisation in retail, actually making in some cases some very small numbers in terms of margin work very hard for you. If we don't get it right as retailers, then we just become another brand in the sea of brands as well. And think about the retailers who you know and what mind space they occupy. And also think about how that brand has evolved over time as well to ensure the brand remains contemporary with you. Why is optimization important? Because there's still plenty of examples of it not happening, and this is where the professionalization within the field really comes to bear. This is a respondent I interviewed last year, and I was talking to him about marketing optimization. How well does that dollar work for you? And his response was that, you know, this year's marketing plan is the same as last year's marketing plan with a little bit of a tweak on it as well. That in itself is a long way away, as you might imagine, from taking a disciplined, a controlled and an evolutionary stance in relation to marketing. But retail marketing is different to many other forms of marketing, and hence the need to understand it as a discipline within a profession. Inventory is a potential weak link for retailers, and not having inventory can be a big deal and a big problem. And again, we're seeing lots of career opportunities now in the inventory management supply chain space to help eradicate the kinds of problems we see here on the screen in front of us, whereby, you know, for some reason something's gone wrong with inventory, with timings, with supply chain, leading to a choice which is really no choice. That becomes quite important when we look at academic research in the space, which points out, for example, in this case, that if you haven't got this stuff on shelf, you know, the basic principle of retailing, then you're going to lose your customers somewhere else. And in a world which is highly populated with retailers, that's probably the worst thing you can do, is let somebody walk out because you haven't got those optimization parameters working for you. A little word on where I'm speaking from, which is Australia. Again, we've seen some tough times too. We've seen slow growth and in many cases no growth, which has led to some fairly dramatic headlines in the industry, store closures, etc., etc. But within that, the stronger retailers continue to evolve, and they evolve based on culture and they evolve based on expertise as well, doing what they do better than anybody else. We are now seeing global online pressures here in Australia from companies like ASOS and Next, for example, and Neiman Marcus from the US now actually actively advertise here in Australia as well. And some retailers are turning up physically, as I mentioned before. Zara are here, Topshop as well, and a whole host of other retailers are planning to test the Australian market with their model. Within that environment, we're seeing that the strong survive and the able survive and the competent survive. Coles supermarkets, for example, have done a fantastic job in recent years of re-engineering their business, really by applying good retail skills and practice to what was an outdated model. We're seeing Supercheap knocking out fantastic figures and Aldi on a huge expansion growth as well. And the one lesson in all of this is that expertise is important and evolution is essential. So we're looking now at an industry which needs professionals and needs able players. We need new thinking to deal with the new markets. We need new paradigms, new ways of looking at customers. There are new skills and new roles in, for example, the social media space, marketing analytics, business analytics. We need businesses which have people who are prepared to learn and prepared to change. And in the management space in particular, we need people who see retail as a career, not just as a succession of jobs. And central to that is actually having professional qualifications which steer you through your retail career. When we spend a minute or two looking at retail at Deakin, and I'd encourage you to visit our website as well, we're plugging that gap. We're helping retail managers and those interested in the profession to become more professional. with, for example, the MBA with its retail specialisation, through the research we conduct, through the thought leadership we conduct, and through the industry engagement and partnerships we have. So please, if you have a minute, have a look at the Deakin site, find out more about our courses, and also have a look at some of those thought leadership initiatives too, which we've published, and are there free for the taking, so you can actually see some of what goes on behind the scenes in terms of retail research. Our specialisation is doing very well, and I'm proud to have been a part of that. Perhaps based on those evolutionary forces within the industry and a growing acknowledgement of the need to professionalise, we're seeing retail student numbers double year on year, and we're also seeing a doubling of student numbers in the newest units that we offer, and merchandise management in particular, which of course is central to successful retailing. We can provide retail education within the MBA, both on campus and off campus, and nationally and internationally, in keeping with the Deakin Wordley philosophy. I would encourage people who are considering the retail industry perhaps to question some of their historic assumptions. Are you thinking old school in terms of the first images I put up for you there in terms of the corner shop mentality, or are you thinking new age in terms of the virtual retail platform which many people or many players are now occupying as well? I know for a fact there are some great retail careers to be had, some great opportunities, and in certain discipline areas, things like analytics, things like category management, buying and planning, there are some extremely attractive salaries to be had as well, and that's not something which people often associate with a career in retail. If you'd like to know more about Deakin's retail offer, then please visit the website whose address I put up for you now, or feel free to contact me personally at the email address which is on the screen now, and also on those retail web pages too. There's still time to get involved with retail at Deakin, as the trimester dates, the next round of trimester dates close, I think, on the 2nd to the 7th of July. So for those thinking of a mid-year enrolment to capitalise on the remaining months ahead, then there's still time to do so. So you'll have a look at the website, explore those course dates, and explore some of those course specialisations as well. And hopefully, as I said, you'll get a better idea of what Deakin does in terms of retail. Listen, time's just about up, so I'll thank you for attending. If there's any questions, again, you can post them and we'll respond to them. And for those of you who've attended the webinar, we'll also be sending out copies of the slides and a recording to you in the very near future as well. Okay, thanks very much, and thanks for attending.